The Cincinnati Reds' latest edition is nice, but based on what it keeps them from doing next, it isn't smart.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Reds. Locked On Reds is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. And now, the number one sports podcasting network in all the land. Thank you so much for helping get us there. My name's Stephen Offenbaker. His name's Jeff Carr. We love baseball. We love the Cincinnati Reds, and we love talking about those things. So much so that we've been talking about the Reds in podcast form for a combined 16 seasons, if you can believe that. We've talked a lot of Reds baseball, and we love talking Reds baseball with you. On today's show, a little bit later, you're going to get all three permanent hosts of Locked On Reds that have ever existed all on one screen as James Rapien returns, coming over from Locked On Bengals to talk ownership. We're going to be playing a fun little game I like to call You Can Only Keep One. Stick around for that. It's a lot of fun. Glad James was able to pop in. Also, the Reds bullpen is better. We have questions about how the resources have been allocated to make that bullpen better, but this Reds bullpen is unquestionably better than it was last season. We're going to break it down and tell you what that bullpen looks like now with the Reds' most recent addition. But where we are going to start is with the aforementioned allocation of funds. Have they been misallocated? Are the Reds spending their money wisely? We're going to tell you the answer to that here in just a second on today's show that's brought to you by FanDuel. The wild card round is here, and FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game. All right, Jeff, let's get into this because the Reds spent some more money and they got that 50 home run. Wait, no, they didn't. They got an outfielder that, oh no, that's not right either. Bullpen. That's where we're going to spend the rest of the money. We got money going to the bullpen. Again, the Cincinnati Reds signed Pierce Johnson, which we will get into a little bit later and break him down and talk about what we think about that move. But what we do know is they took $6 million of the limited millions that were left and they gave it to a relief pitcher, which I feel like probably closes the door on any other big move. We were hoping something might happen before Reds Fest next weekend where the Reds would make a big signing, make a big move, address this lineup, and give us something to be excited about from a position player standpoint. Doesn't look like that's going to happen.
Now, the team is on the field, Steve, when it comes to this offseason, unless something completely surprising, unexpected, and quite frankly, shocking happens next. I wrote about this over at CincinnatiRedstock.com, and when you really consider what's going on right now with the Reds, we looked at this the other day, probably looking at about $140 million that the Reds have to spend. And this was before the Pierce Johnson move. They had spent $130 million. And so roughly $10 million, give or take a couple, is what they have left. They spent $6.5 million on it on another relief pitcher. And look, it's a good move in a vacuum. Pierce Johnson adds value to this bullpen, but it's the fact that the Reds entered this offseason with a need in the lineup, and they have not addressed that. J.J. Bleday and Dane Myers, from the words of Nick Graw himself, are upside plays and not necessarily what they, not what they're shooting for. At least that's what he said. But as of right now, the actions show us that that is the move that they're going to do to improve the outfield, to improve the lineup, because Austin Hayes is gone and he isn't back yet. And they haven't gone and brought back Miguel Andujar. They haven't added Kyle Schwarber and Eugenio Suarez unless they're hiding somewhere in Cincinnati. And I think Kyle Schwarber is actually in Philadelphia. So all of that being said, these additions that the Reds have made have addressed an area of the team, but have left one area very barren. And I'm going to break this down by percentage of payroll that is given. I'm not talking about the expensiveness, because we understand that the Reds aren't going to hand out Alex Bregman contracts like what the Cubs just gave to him. But based on what they do spend, the Reds have allocated their money accordingly. 47% of it, just a little bit over 47% of it, to pitching. 39.7% is going to the infield. The outfield is getting 7.3% of the budget, Steve. And when you look at the outfield, it shows.
On that 7.3, just so that I'm clear, does that include Spencer Steer, or is he in the infield money?
No, he's on the infield.
He's on the infield money. Okay. Yeah. You look at that and it really paints the picture, and the picture is bleak for this outfield. We're going to get into offseason grading, and I feel like I don't want to wait all the way to the end of the offseason, but I know where I am on this. I think that the Reds front office has failed miserably. That graphic is just another indicator of how miserably they have failed, in my estimation, to address the needs of this team. And now for multiple off seasons, this is not a one-off. They have clearly demonstrated that they just simply don't value upgrading this lineup in any way, shape, or form. If the Cincinnati Reds are to make the playoffs in 2026, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that over the rest of this offseason and all of the 2026 season, but if they are to make the playoffs, I already know who the Cincinnati Reds MVP will be. I am calling it right now. The Reds MVP for the 2026 season, if this team even sniffs the postseason, is Hope. Hope will be MVP of the Cincinnati Reds.
Oh, Hope. Yeah, he's that left fielder. He's 6'6". He's got a cannon for an arm, and he can hit the ball out of the ballpark so much so this guy's got so much power he can knock the Tundra off its pedestal, at least in our imagination.
Right.
Or in Nick Krall's imagination. The one name player known as Hope that we continually rely on, and put him in different parts of the lineup. Now, Steve, that's the thing too, is it's not that they don't want to improve the lineup. It's that they think their improvements are coming internally. They believe that their improvements are coming from Matt McLain playing better, and Noelvi Marte taking a step forward, and Ellie De La Cruz becoming a superstar, and Spencer Steer doing what he did for most of the season and not for what he did in the first month of the season. Like, there's so much about this that just says, look, we know we can't afford both, so we're going to pay for one. That's the thing for me, though. Like, it just feels as though the resources and the reason that I use the terminology that I did, if those who remember Nick Krall's quotes from a few years ago, whenever they got rid of players to reallocate the payroll to their resources, well, the allocation of their current payroll is misallocated, because it really feels as though they're spending far too much money in one area and not enough in another. And I have a hard time dinging them for the dead money bit, because Jeimer Candelario should not be on this team. But at the same time, they're spending more money on Jeimer Candelario next year than the outfield in perpetuity.
And I think those percentages also mirror what they do in the draft, Jeff. This is what they do. They draft shortstops and they draft pitchers. So infielders and pitchers. That's where the focus is. But the lack of attention that's been paid to this outfield is almost just it makes me nauseous. I will say this: Nick Krall's operating the way a president of baseball operations operates when he knows his job is not in jeopardy. Nick Krall has had a performance appraisal. He's been called into Bob and Phil's offices, and they've sat him down and they said, "Good job, son, because we're able to almost buy that jet. So you keep doing what you're doing. Here's a little bit of money to play with, and you just go do what you do. Just make sure you keep it interesting. Just keep it interesting, Nick." And that's what he's doing. That's the team he's building with the hope. That word, Chad Dotchton's just giggling somewhere, with hope out there as the great, that'll bring them into the ballpark factor of it all.
Yeah, we're definitely going to dive a lot more into that coming up here a little bit later on with James Rapien from Locked On Bengals. But I do know this, Steve, like, the move for Pierce Johnson is an upgrade, and the bullpen is better. We're going to tell you just how much coming up next. The NFL playoffs are raging on, and FanDuel is officially in playoff mode every single day. In fact, every game day during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action. Because right now, every NFL playoff game day, FanDuel users get a profit boost pack waiting for them inside the app. Each game day, you'll see a pack loaded with multiple profit boosts that you can apply to bets that you like the most. The boost lets you lean into your game day instincts, whether you're backing momentum shifts, looking at defensive play, quarterback play, or coaching, all of it. The profit boost really help you out with that. And so you can get in on the action for every NFL playoff game. Plus you can check out some futures. There's MLB bets for like division odds and things like that. Reds still in third. Cubs moved ahead of the Brewers after the Alex Bregman signing. Got to check all of that out over on FanDuel. Visit FanDuel each and every NFL playoff game day and get yourself a profit boost pack. FanDuel is an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you for making Locked On Reds your first listen of the day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. Look, you already live your team every day. Now take it up a level and go ad-free. Join the Everydayer Club today and get Locked On Reds with no interruptions, members-only Discord access, and so much more. All for just $5 a month or $50 for the whole year. Go to lockedonreds.supercast.com or check the link in the show notes to learn more. All right, Steve. So one of the things that, I do like the Pierce Johnson signing in a vacuum. It's just the big picture that was affected that had me negatively feeling about it, because it's clear they're not going to make that impact move for an impact bat. But the bullpen is pretty good, with upside of being really good after this addition. The Reds really only have one spot in question for this bullpen, supposing health, which somebody's probably going to get hurt in spring training. We know that happens. But as it stands right now, the 1 through 7 is really solid with a lot of upside. And then whoever is that 8th spot could be very interesting, but I feel really good about this group now.
Yeah, you look at Pierce Johnson, they're not bringing him in to be part of the B tier of this Reds bullpen. He's in that A group. He is coming in the A group. He's going to be a 7th, 8th, 9th inning guy. So this makes us ask some really interesting questions. And I feel like this puts a battle now between Graham Ashcraft and Connor Phillips, who wants to be in the A group more, because one of those two guys is going to get kicked to be in your 6th inning, first guy in role. For the most part of the season. So it's going to create an interesting dynamic in spring training. You look at Johnson's numbers. Last season, his strikeouts per 9 was down to 9, not horrible, but down. The rest of his career, he was at least 10 or better, Jeff. And at least since he came back from Japan. His first 2 years in the league, he pitched 1 game as a 26-year-old in 2017. His age 27 season in 2018 was terrible. He went to Japan. He came back having figured some things out. He's been really good since then. But low strikeout per 9. Now his walk rate was fine. 2.9 walks per 9 innings last season. So I'm okay with that. But you look at these numbers, I see a guy that's much more likely to push Tony Santillan than a guy that's going to be out of that A group. So the back end of the Reds bullpen now looks really solid with your closer nailed down as Emilio Pagan. They've already said that. That's his job unless, the wheels come off. You look at Tony Santillan, who seemed poised to really assume that role, to really dig into that, but they brought Pagan back instead. So you've got a really good alternative for days that Pagan's tired, or a really good setup man. And now you add Pierce Johnson to the mix. I like that group of 3. I feel pretty good about it. They've signed Caleb Ferguson over the offseason. He's another guy that, I think is a bridge arm, Jeff. I think, not B group, maybe not quite in this A group, but a guy you can go to when one of the A group arms are tired. You can look at him. So I think the back end of the Reds bullpen for 2026 is in a much better place than when we looked at this group in 2025.
Yeah. And even to kind of expound on what you're saying a little bit, I expanded it out to 2 years, because you're right when you talk about Pierce Johnson. He's seen a little bit of regression here, especially when you even look at 2023. But I said, all right, let's look at the Reds bullpen group, and let's look at what they did in 2024 and what they did in 2025 and kind of average it out a little bit, because most of these guys, average about 50 some innings per season. Graham Ashcraft's a little bit different because he pitched some as a starter in 2024. But at the same time, he was still just 71. It's not as if he was going crazy. And the way that you put all these guys together, you feel really good about them. They've got good strikeouts per 9. Graham Ashcraft needs to see his come up a little bit, but his walks per 9 is pretty consistent with the rest of this group. And then when you consider the FIP, the fielding independent pitching, something that I talked a lot about with Graham Ashcraft the other day. It's a statistic that I really like to turn to, especially when I'm talking about relief pitchers as opposed to ERA, because fielding independent pitching is focused more so on what pitchers can control. So when you look at that statistic, all of these guys, except for Sam Maul, are under 4. And of course, Connor Phillips only pitched in 2025. He doesn't have 2 years worth of data, but even Connor Phillips is under 4 when it comes to FIP. And so I feel really good about all 7 of these guys. I think it's not a stretch to say that this is a top 15 group when you consider all of Major League Baseball, and it's got top 10 upside, which means to me that is a pro to the Cincinnati Reds playoff resume for 2026, not a con, which I think you could have made an argument for before they made these moves for Caleb Ferguson and for Pierce Johnson.
Well, you look at this group they've assembled between the starting pitching and the relief pitching. It's a really good pitching staff. But again, that MVP hope, it's going to have to play a factor here, because basically the Reds are going to have to win a lot of 1-run games, a lot of 1-0 games. They're going to need these pitchers to shut down the opposing team's lineups, because there's not going to be a lot of offense to be had.
At least if you look at it on Tums next year.
Now I know we've been saying, like, we think Matt McLain is going to be much better than he was. We think a healthy Spencer Steer all year is going to be much better than he was last year. There's a lot of things that could happen where this team can score some runs, but these aren't things that can be counted on. These aren't things you can look at on paper right now and say, this is what is going to happen. We think that might be the way it goes, but the strategy here is very heavily into the fingers crossed. And I just don't know how you run a professional sports team that way. But I look at the group, and with these signings now, Jeff, it makes me call into question a couple things. The first thing is my guy, Brandon Williamson. I've been a big Brandon Williamson fan since he was pitching down in Louisville, and I wanted him called up. They did it. He learned a lot at the major league level. I thought he did really well, despite what David Bell was trying to do to him. But I think now, looking at this group and looking at the signings and looking at where things are, he may start the season at Louisville as a starting pitcher, and they may keep him stretched out down there. And the Louisville bats rotation will have a 1-2 punch of Rhett Lauder and Brandon Williamson in the wings in case something goes wrong with the starting rotation. I'm not so sure now that Williamson will be that bridge guy that we thought he would be in the bullpen, the long man, so to speak.
I agree with you. I don't think I really feel like the strategy with the way that they've attacked the bullpen was, we don't want to rely on that being a thing. Now, he could earn his way into that. That could be something that they decide after the fact. But I kind of feel like that last spot in the bullpen, supposing everybody else is healthy, but that last spot in the bullpen is a competition with Zach Maxwell and Luis May as your favorites to win that spot. Or they could reimagine it and say, yeah, maybe Brandon Williamson is best served as our Nick Martinez guy in that spot, because that's the one thing that this bullpen lacks. They don't have a Brent Suter. They don't have a Brandon Williamson that can give them 2, 3, 4 innings when they need it. But quite frankly, I'm not that worried about that, because I feel so good about the starting rotation. There's a little bit of a give and take there, where it's like the starting rotation has gotten so good that, sure, you're going to have those days where guys just don't have their best stuff. But more often than not, you're not going to need to have that guy that can give you 2, 3, 4 innings sitting out there in the bullpen taking up a roster spot. It's very likely they give that last spot to the winner in camp of one of those fireballing type dudes.
Is there a scenario where you take Graham Ashcraft into Goodyear and you work him as a starting pitcher during spring training and stretch him out, and he's the bridge guy? If he's kind of the odd man out in the A group now with the signings, could you make him your bridge guy? Because we always thought he was great for 2 innings. Then you get to that 3rd, 4th inning, it's a problem. Well, maybe you stretch out Graham and he's your 6th inning, first in the ball game, get you to the A group nails guy.
My only thought with that is he really saw some success, and like the 2-year averages thing that I was talking about, like he was really brought down by some of his performances in 2024. 2025, he saw an uptick in strikeouts. He saw a little bit of an uptick in walks as well, but like more strikeouts, and the walks were okay. Obviously, the fielding independent pitching we've talked a lot about was really excellent from him last year. And so I kind of feel like they're just going to approach him as a relief pitcher. I don't know that they're going to stretch him out. Maybe they give him a couple of 2-inning appearances in camp just to make sure that that's under his belt. But I don't expect them to work him out as a starter and then move him to the bullpen.
All right, that's fair. That's fair. All right, Jeff, we're going to spend a lot of time this offseason talking about this pitching staff, talking about this bullpen, talking about this team. I think you're right. Largely, the team is on the field. We're going to continue to break it down all offseason long. But coming up, our good buddy James Rapien swings over from Locked On Bengals, and we're going to take a look at the question of the two ownership groups in the city of Cincinnati. You get to keep one, you get to punt one, using some football terminology. See what I did there? Which one you keeping? We're going to talk with James coming up next. If you can't watch us here on YouTube, you can get us on every single podcasting app that's out there. We're seriously on every audio channel you could possibly imagine. If you find one we're not on and you need us on it, send Jeff a message. He can make it happen for you. Also, make sure you check out Locked On MLB every single night, every single morning, actually, because Sully's got you covered over there with great stuff in the Locked On MLB channel from a national perspective. All right, I'm going to bring in some guys here. I've seen you guys in the comment section. I've been reading them, and I've seen the comparisons between what is going on in the front office of the Cincinnati Reds and what is going on over at Paycor Stadium with the Cincinnati Bengals. And I thought, why not bring an expert in on what's going on at Paycor, but also for the everydayers of the everydayers. You're going to remember that this guy is the OG, the original, the number one host of Locked On Reds. From day one, he launched this show. It's James Rapien joining us from Locked On Bengals. James, I appreciate you being here because the ownership situation within the city of Cincinnati is it's a train wreck. It's an absolute train wreck. So what I thought would be fun for us and for the everydayers is to play a little game I call You Can Only Get Rid of One. If you had the power to choose one of these ownership groups to sell, whether it's the Brown family or the Castellini family, but you had to keep the other and they were going to be here forever, which one you take it?
I would pick the Castellini family to sell. And being on Locked On Reds, one, thanks for the intro. That's very nice and kind of you. You guys are the number one host of Locked On Reds. But I think about the structures, and this is baseball-wise and football-wise, and I think about the Bengals' path to a Super Bowl and the Reds' path to a World Series. And there's so many elements here, but it's very simple. In baseball, you can spend and spend and spend and spend and spend and spend some more. NFL, yeah, the salary cap is half fake, but it's still a cap. You still have to abide by it to a certain degree. And even if you have mountains and mountains of cash, you could throw those into facilities and scouts and all of the things that Bengals fans rightfully complain about.
Right.
You still have to abide by that salary cap. And so which one would be more beneficial? I think it would be having a Reds owner that is willing to say, Kyle Schwarber, we'll pay you and you're going to be our 5-hitter because we got 1 through 4 locked up for the next decade because Ellie De La Cruz just signed for $500 million. You know, like those type of deals. And I know I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you understand the premise here. I just think spending goes or can go farther in baseball.
Well, yeah, like owners have far more influence on the game, I think, in baseball than any other sport. NBA, MLS, NHL, to a smaller degree. I don't necessarily understand ownership in those sports, but for the most part, like baseball is the game that if you got money and you want to throw it at a passion project, that's the way to put your stamp on things. Like, I think more people know Steve Cohen's name now than they ever did before he purchased the New York Mets.
Correct.
It's without a doubt. And it's because he wrote in there and it was just like, we're going to have a big time team. Now, it hasn't worked out for him, but there's more to that than just Steve Cohen that the Mets have to deal with. I'm with you. I think that if you could change one of the two, it's got to be the Reds ownership group. And I don't even necessarily put the blame on just the Castellini. Everybody likes to do that because he's the figurehead. He's the guy that's talking to everybody. But there's like 18 different people that own the Cincinnati Reds. And if you were getting into a team now, unless you're structured like the Green Bay Packers, you're not going to have an ownership group that is that large because it's just not it's not approachable enough for a group of people like that to be able to purchase a team and to be able to run a team. And, they've never had any capital calls. And quite frankly, I think that if anybody's printing a fake banner, that's probably the banner that they print, that they've never had a capital call at Great American Ballpark. So I think for me, if we're calling one or two of the others and getting them out of here, we're calling the Reds ownership group and we're saying somebody else is going to be sitting in that chair.
I wasn't sure this was going to be unanimous, but it is in fact going to be unanimous because I am also picking the Castellinis to sell, but for a little bit different reasons. First of all, just to what you said, Jeff, Castellini is not a figurehead. He has the controlling say. He is the boss. It starts and ends with him, and he is the one. He's the one to decide to make a capital call. Those other 18 owners can't do anything without Castellini's say-so and approval. So I don't think he gets to skate on that. Here's why I'm picking the Castellinis to sell versus the Brown family. I look at Bob Castellini, I look at Mike Brown. Those dudes are on their way out. However much longer they have, they're both guys that are in their 80s. They've done their things. Eventually, they're going to either retire or they will go. And the next generations in those families will take over. And I look at Phil Castellini, and I look at Katie, and I look at Elizabeth over at Paycor, and I'm like, which of the next generations do I believe has a better chance to adapt to the modern game and get something done? Phil Castellini, I have a hard time believing that man can find his car keys in the morning. I don't think that he has any business running a professional baseball franchise. So from a standpoint of that and the hope of the future and the ability to adapt and modernize and do things, I'm going with the Brown family. I'm keeping them in Cincinnati. And I want the produce king to load up his cabbage trucks and get the hell out of here.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, but I will say this as someone that talks about the Bengals every single day of my life, essentially, and I love doing it. I don't trust the next generation at all. I think in a lot of ways, Katie is worse than Mike and has picked up the bad qualities of Mike without the good qualities of Mike. And that is scary in and of itself. But another reason why I think if the Reds, it's the where you're going to go element of it. I think if the Reds sold, they would still go to Great American Ballpark and have an awesome time. Maybe I'm wrong on that. If the Bengals sold, we've seen NFL franchises quickly move in these grand, amazing stadiums that are being like, that would scare me. It really would. And I don't want them leaving Cincinnati. I don't want either team leaving Cincinnati. I think you would, all three of us agree with that. And so that's the other factor here is, all right, well, how far will the dollar go? What would have the bigger impact? And part of that's just the way baseball is structured. But then the other element here is, look, I get it. The athletics and it can happen. I think the Bengals would be far more likely to leave Cincinnati if they were controlled by another owner, especially one of these gazillionaires that wants to build one of these grand ballrooms that we've seen across the NFL as they continue to be built.
Well, and there's these other like unwritten walls that are in place that hypothetically, say Phil or whoever took over the Reds and wanted to move them out of Cincinnati, there are these hypothetical walls that they would have to knock down, historical walls that I don't think that Major League Baseball is as, eager to move out of the way for a baseball franchise to move out of Cincinnati. I think the NFL hates the Bengals, and they have for the entire existence of the franchise. And so if somebody takes over the Bengals and says, I want to move them to Austin, or I want to move them to wherever, they'd be like, please, thank you. It's about time. Like, we've been waiting for this to happen forever. And so, yes, I absolutely agree with you. So I kind of turn this around a little bit. Like, of the two, which next generation is most likely to entertain that idea? Because I kind of look at all the different things that Phil Castellini has done in public that have not been related to the Reds Community Fund, which has been a rock star success. Everything else about what he has said, telling the Rosie Reds about how many teams are out of it before opening day, telling us where we're going to go, all those different things, like, that leads me to believe that if there's a buyer that ponies up, I think Phil's interested.
I hope not, but yeah, I can't rule that out. I think it's hard for me to see the scenario where Katie is like, oh, well, let's sell.
Yeah.
To your point.
Thankfully.
And it is her life. Like, they want to win. Like, that is I think that's a major misconception about they want to win. Now, they believe their way is the way, which you could debate all day long. And obviously we do on Locked On Bengals, but I don't foresee that being an issue, knock on wood, for them. To your point, the way you're going to go, just the overall vibe that Phil presents now versus 15 years ago, wouldn't shock me if he's like, oh, well, maybe we do sell. And so that would be concerning, but maybe they sell and it's because that controlling owner wants to operate in Cincinnati and at Great American Ballpark and do all of those things. Like, that wouldn't shock me either. And I do think that this market, when more than competitive but exciting, can obviously generate, as you guys know, a ton of interest, not just in baseball, but in playoff baseball and winning baseball, something that we haven't seen for many years of my lifetime.
You know, you look at the Reds purchase, they paid what, 275, Jeff, somewhere in that neighborhood, right? When they bought it, 275 million. I've said a lot of times, James, that if the Linder family had just held on like 3 more years before they sold this team would have sold for way more than it did. And we would have a better ownership group, because I think Jeff is right. The ownership group that got cobbled together really didn't have any business buying a professional baseball team, but the market was what the market was. The Reds are valued at over $1 billion now. So there is definitely some capital gains there on what was paid for the purchase price versus what the new selling price would be for the Reds. Now, you guys have spun me around a little bit because I didn't factor in the movability factor, the movability of the franchise. I think you're right. If one versus the other, I think there would be a much easier probability of the Bengals moving than of the Reds moving.
Yeah.
And I hate that thought, but that's a thought that I've always had. Like, the moment that it goes there, and it's a bummer of a thought process to go down, and a heck of a way to slide into the outro of the show for sure. But that's kind of what the ownership discussion comes into, right? And this is one of the reasons why I was happy that we were able to get together and do this for today, because quite frankly, as a lot of people always tell us, you could about do this every single day on every single show, but I think we would get so fatigued by this, because this is where this discussion ultimately comes to.
It does. And it's never going to stop until you win.
Right.
Once you win, it's like, oh, well, your way does work. Focusing on the bullpen and not on hitting and not going after the big free agents, but it does work. Not being the team that does this or that or does guaranteed money if I'm getting into the but until you win, everyone's going to point to it because it's a flaw. Flaws are very well hidden by trophies. And it doesn't feel like either organization right now is that close to a trophy. They might be a playoff contention, but that's much different than World Series or Super Bowl contention.
Well, James, I appreciate you so much for jumping over here. You guys can get James. If I can't imagine there's anybody listening that doesn't know where to find James, but James is out there. He's at Locked On Bengals. He's one half of that show with Jake Lisco, bringing you Locked On Bengals. You're in off-season mode over there as well. You guys going 3 days a week right now in the feeds?
No, 5 days, baby. 5 days.
Yes,
this is
5 days.
Yeah, we're building a Super Bowl champion. We go to 3 in like June, so we got to.
All right, so get over there, click subscribe. After you listen to Locked On Reds every day, go check out Locked On Bengals. We've got you covered for the entire city of Cincinnati, and that is where we're going to go ahead and wrap it up today. Thanks for making Locked On Reds your first listen each and every day. We appreciate you being here. For those of us watching on the YouTube feed, we're going to send you over to Locked On's first ever 24/7 national sports channel there on the YouTube. If you're in the audios, go check out Sully over at Locked On MLB. He's got Major League Baseball covered for you from a national perspective. Lots and lots of great stuff. We'll be back in your feeds again tomorrow, keeping you Locked On Reds every single day.